Have you ever just stopped and wondered what actually happens when we build a medicine out of living biology? I mean, we're all pretty used to standard chemical pills, right? Where every single capsule rolling off the line is exactly the same, manufactured with this rigid mathematical precision. But in the cell and gene therapy world, our raw materials are literally alive. We're talking about cells, viruses, and genes as building blocks. So how on earth do you guarantee safety and consistency when your starting material basically has a mind of its own?
Okay, let's dive into this. The short answer, you have to control the chaos. Because we're dealing with living, breathing ingredients, variability is totally inherent. It's just baked right into the biology. We can't completely eliminate it like we can in a sterile synthetic chemistry lab. What we can do, and frankly what we absolutely must do, is characterize it, understand it, and build some incredibly robust systems to keep it under control.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on Module 3 of our CMC regulatory strategy, and we're keeping it strictly focused on the materials that build our therapies and the traceability systems that track them. You can think of this as exploring the physical foundation of these living drugs and the invisible lifeline that keeps every single patient safe.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the physical foundation, looking at CGT's living building blocks and qualifying critical raw materials. Then, we shift to the invisible lifeline, exploring why chain of identity matters, mastering chain of custody, and finally wrapping up with donor eligibility and viral safety.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, cGMP's living building blocks. Everything starts with the raw biological materials.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the fundamental divide in how we actually source these materials. You basically have two main pathways, autologic and allogenic. Autologic starting material is straight from the patient's own cells, typically collected via apheresis or a tissue biopsy in a clinic. You're literally making a custom bespoke drug for one specific person. Allogenic material, on the flip side, comes from screened eligible donors. This material feeds into large-scale cell banking systems that are intended to treat many patients.
For those allogeneic processes and for viral vector production, we manage all that biological variability using a clever two-tiered cell banking system. First up, you have the master cell bank, or MCB, which is extensively, and I mean extensively, characterized. From that master source, you derive your working cell bank, or WCB, which is what you use for routine day-to-day manufacturing. What this brilliantly does is give us a consistent, qualified starting point across countless batches. Now, it doesn't magically guarantee identical potency every single time, but it drastically anchors and controls that wild, inherent variability of biology.
But, hey, cells are only part of the equation, right? We also rely on critical components like plasmids, which act as the genetic templates for our viral vectors or therapeutics. Then we have viral vector intermediates and some incredibly powerful gene editing reagents. And here's the kicker. Because plasmids and vectors are foundational templates, they have this massive, outsized impact on product quality. Seriously, any flaw, any minor impurity, or any quality issue at this stage doesn't just ruin one vial. It cascades downstream into literally every single batch produced from them.
Moving right along to Section 2, qualifying critical raw materials. Because it isn't just the cells and vectors that matter, it's everything they come into contact with.
It's super important to remember that everything touching the product during the process matters just as much. Think about the single-use assemblies, the enzymes, processing reagents, culture media, the whole shebang. Now, human or animal-derived materials carry inherent transmissible disease risks. That's exactly why, wherever it's actually scientifically and operationally feasible, animal component-free alternatives are highly preferred to minimize that risk. We also have to classify these materials. Are they pharmacopoeial, meaning they meet established compendial expectations like the European Pharmacopoeia or the USP? Or are they non-pharmacopoeial, where the sponsor has to step up, define their own specifications, and scientifically justify them?
So let's test your instincts here for a second. Imagine a critical raw material supplier suddenly pings you and says they're making a change to their manufacturing process. What is your appropriate first response? I know, it sounds like a totally routine administrative update, right? But believe it or not, undisclosed or unassessed supplier changes are a massive, recurring root cause of quality failures in this industry. It happens all the time.
So, the crucial point is that you never ever just accept a change simply because the supplier was previously qualified. No way. Step 1. You absolutely must assess the change's impact on your critical quality attributes, or CQAs. Then Step 2, you determine if you need to run comparability studies or do a full requalification of the supplier. And only after all that do you move to Step 3, making the call to accept or reject the new lot.
That brings us to Section 3, Chain of Identity Matters.
Let's pivot from those physical building blocks over to our lifeline tracking systems, starting with the absolute most critical one for autologous therapies.
Chain of identity is exactly what it sounds like. It's the system ensuring a patient's specific product is uniquely, unambiguously, and correctly linked to its intended recipient at every single stage. At its core, this entire system exists to answer one very vital question with absolute certainty: whose material is it?
I really want to pause and emphasize the weight of this for a second. A chain of identity failure for an autologous product is a direct patient safety event, period. It is not merely a paperwork issue, it's not some minor deviation you just sign off on. If you mix up the identity and accidentally give a patient cells engineered for someone else's immune system, the consequences can literally be fatal. The stakes absolutely do not get any higher than this. To prevent a nightmare scenario like that, we build in heavily redundant checkpoints. Take a fictional case study. Let's call them Asteria Advanced Therapeutics. If we trace their autologous T-cell product, it relies on incredibly strict collection site labeling right at apheresis. Then they layer on redundant identity checks at key transitions, like receipt at the manufacturing site, product release, shipping, and a critical final pre-administration check right at the clinical site. We are basically hunting for any single point of failure risks and deploying these redundant checks to catch a mix-up long before it ever reaches the patient.
Moving seamlessly into Section 4, Mastering Chain of Custody. This is the complementary system that works perfectly hand-in-hand with identity.
Chain of custody is the documented, unbroken control of location, condition, and possession at each and every handling step. And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference between the two tracking systems. While chain of identity asks the who does this belong to, chain of custody asks, where has this material been, who had it, and what exact condition was it in during the journey?
You see, gaps in custody documentation totally undermine your confidence in the product's quality, even if the identity was absolutely perfect. So we rely heavily on custody tracking tools. We're talking temperature and transit monitoring devices to give us hard, objective evidence of the material's condition while it's on the move. We use rigorous reconciliation at transfer points, and increasingly, the whole industry is leaning on electronic tracking, using barcodes or RFID to support real-time verification. These electronic systems can literally flag a mismatch and physically stop the process in its tracks before an irreversible step, like infusion, actually happens.
Finally, let's bring it home with Section 5, Donor Eligibility and Viral Safety. This is our final layer of the safety net.
Because we're sourcing from humans, we have to actively and aggressively manage biological risks. Donor eligibility programs are foundational here. They assess and manage those transmissible disease risks before the material ever even crosses the threshold of a manufacturing facility. On top of that, we layer microbial control strategies that combine in-process monitoring with rapid methods. Honestly, it's pretty amazing how rapid microbial testing today can give us answers in a matter of hours, compared to those legacy 14-day assays we used to rely on. We also mandate very targeted testing for mycoplasma, which is a huge historical cell culture contamination risk, and other adventitious agents. All these records together form the absolute bedrock of your starting material quality record. Now, keeping those ICH viral safety evaluation principles in mind, let's do one last knowledge check. Replication-competent virus, or RCV risk, is a very specific type of danger. What manufacturing process do you think it's most closely associated with? Let's move to and see how this builds our safety strategy. RCV risk arises specifically from retroviral, lentiviral, and other viral vector production processes. Because these vectors are engineered directly from viruses to deliver genetic material, there's this remote but very real risk that they could recombine and regain their ability to replicate. Therefore, RCV testing strategies aren't just an afterthought. They're a highly dedicated, deeply integrated response to this specific risk category, built right into the starting material control.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground today. But before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. If a living drug's safety relies entirely on the absolute purity of its origins and the flawless traceability of its journey, how do we actually take those materials and build the process to manufacture the final therapy? Having mastered the materials and the tracking lifelines, you are now perfectly set up to discover exactly how we do that. In Module 4, we'll be tackling manufacturing process development and control strategies. Until then, keep exploring, and thanks so much for joining me today.